Welcome to shop. Today in woodworking we're going to use the wood lathe and we're going to make a mallet. And today the mallet is going to be a little special because it's going to have an oval handle. We're not just going to cut with circles, but the oval is a little bit extra work and we're going to learn how to do that today. So here are a couple of mallets. I have several examples laying around and today the mallet is our project. The first step to making a mallet is that we start off with the head. I'd recommend you do the head first because the head is a lot easier than anything else. So to make the head, I've already cut a couple of cuts on one end and I want you to take a back saw and cut the other end as well. So if I take a back saw and I'm going to fasten this in a vise in just a second, and then I'm going to take the saw and I'm going to cut diagonally from each corner here and from each corner here, and that will give me some cuts. I want you to cut about half of a centimeter deep, and that should be good. So into the vise. So now we've got the cuts, and then I bring it back and I'm going to put it into the lathe. The thing that you want to do is to take the spur bit and you want to tap it down into the cut that you made. So in order to tap it, just take it over to the bench and take a mallet, one that's already made, and just tap that down in. So it makes the groove just a little bit bigger. Makes it want to stick. And we're going to put that spur bit into the drive end of the lathe. Now this one already has a spur bit stuck in there and I need to get it out. The best way, you don't ever take a pair of pliers or anything like that. The best way to get it out is to take some kind of a rod and put it in from the back side and just give it a knock and it pops it right out. The reason why it doesn't want to come out on its own is because it has a taper in it, and the taper makes it tighter. So I take my project and I push it in there like that, and then I move the tailstock up so that the running center of the tailstock points right in the crosshairs of the cuts that you made on the other side. So tighten down the tailstock and then I just tighten this up a little bit, and I can rotate my stock. And stock is the name that is used to describe the piece of wood that you're working on. So I rotate the stock and it doesn't hit on the tool rest. That's good. I need to adjust the tool rest so that it's close but not touching. So I just tighten up the saddle here. The center piece is called a saddle. I tighten it up on the bed of the lathe, and I can adjust the height of the tool rest as well. I need to adjust the height of the tool rest so that when I set a chisel on the tool rest, I'm cutting very near the center line of the stock. If you're way low or way high, it's not going to cut correctly. Now, this particular tool rest, I need to back it up just a little bit because I'm so close that the chisel is going to fall off the tool rest by the time I start cutting. So there, we'll just adjust it like that. And I can hang on to that and I can do some cutting. Now the thing about a chisel, any chisel, there are a couple of different chisels. Here's another one. These are all round nose chisels, and they've been sharpened an awful lot because they're getting very short. Originally they were probably this long, and you always have to keep them sharp. There's no use trying to cut with a dull chisel because you're just going to tear the wood out and it's going to get hot. It's just no fun cutting on a lathe with a dull chisel. I'll do the sharpening, don't worry about that. But when you cut, you always cut with the longer portion of the chisel at the top. So here are a couple of chisels, and we're looking at the chisel is longer at the top than it is at the bottom, or the heel. The long part does the cutting, so it's got to be at the top because the wood rotates towards you. And I know that you're looking towards me, you're actually at the back side of the lathe, and from this side here, we're looking at the front side of the lathe. So the stock is rotating towards me. The chisel sits on the tool rest. It never comes off the tool rest when you're cutting. It must be on there. So it's touching the tool rest at all times. Your hand, one of your hands, and most likely your left hand, is riding on the tool rest at all times. It's sliding back and forth. I put my pointing finger on there and it slides back and forth. And the reason is that that left hand is the one that's holding on to the chisel. It holds it and it allows me to feel very small movements in and out. So if the chisel is moving in and out, that means that I'm cutting a circle which is not round. In some parts it might be a bit smaller, and some parts it might be a bit bigger. I need to make sure that the chisel doesn't go in and out as I'm cutting. So I can feel that when I have my hand on the tool rest and on the chisel at the same time. My other hand, which is way back here, does the steering. It steers to the left or to the right or up or down, and that is because left and right allows me to find a sharper portion on the chisel. Sometimes some parts of it aren't as sharp, or it gets duller. So you need to rotate a little bit. And also, if I'm moving to the left as I'm cutting, I need to slant a little bit to the right. If I'm moving the other direction, I'll be slanting the other way. And you'll find from experimentation that you're able to figure out which way is best to hold the chisel. Up and down changes how much you cut. Sometimes you want to remove a lot, sometimes just very little bit. So you'll find that as you raise or lower it, you can remove more or less. So now let's get into doing some cutting. I'll move these other chisels out of the way, and I turn on my wood lathe. So there's lots of noise, and it's rotating. So my hand goes on to the tool rest, the chisel goes on to the tool rest, and I'm still not touching wood. And as I slowly move the chisel into the wood, I can move the chisel to the left and back to the right. And I'll just turn it off here and we'll take a look. It looks like we've removed an awful lot of sawdust and wood, but really we haven't done much. We've just taken a few bits off the outer corners. So I'm going to do this for a while, and I'm going to lathe this down into a circle. So now I've got a reasonable looking cylinder there. It's very rough. It even has a few flat pieces on it, but I need to move my tool rest closer to the work, because I can put my hand right down there. So that means that it's really getting too far. The problem is that if you're working and you're not hanging on to your chisel good enough with your right hand, you're going to drop your chisel down the hole. It's going to grab it and rip it right out of your hand. So we need to do some work there. So loosen off the saddle here and bring it a little bit closer. And now I can do some more fine detailed work. Once in a while you may have to check your tailstock, and just to be sure that it stays tight, snug that up a little bit. You don't want this all rattling loose. Okay, take another look at it. Looks good. It's a cylinder, it's all the way around, it's reasonably smooth, and I'm happy with that. There is no actual measurement that I expect that you're going to do for the head. All I want you to do now is to take the material down until it is a cylinder all the way around. That's it. If it's large, it's large. If it's a little bit smaller, don't get worried about it. So at this point, I have to figure out how long the head of the mallet is going to be. Well, there's one measurement only for this particular project, and that is 4 inches. So you need some kind of a measuring tool. Here I've got a tri-square, and I take my tri-square and I set it up on top of the project, and I really am not too concerned about how long it is now. I just want to make sure that I've got a measurement of 4 inches. So I can move the tri-square so that there's a little bit of wasted material on each side of the 4-inch distance. Total distance between those two marks is 4 inches. So you can see those two marks on the lathe right now, and if I start it up, all I have to do is take my pencil and I've got it marked off for 4 inches, and you can see the mark all the way around. That pencil is going to disappear very quickly because I'm going to take a parting tool and I'm going to cut that off. Now we can use a parting tool in a couple of ways. You can use it a bit like a diamond point, so I can hold it like this and I can cut a V, or I can use it on its edge the way it was designed and I can part 2 halves of the material. So either way, here we'll just cut a V in it. And now I'm going to remove a lot of the extra material. Okay, so there I have the ends of it marked off. Now I've got a big chip that came out of this one end. I'm not terribly worried yet. I would get worried if it broke it completely off. So you want to stay away from the ends as much as possible, and certainly away from the drive end, because the chips will come out a lot easier. That spur bit has already cut down in there. I need to make sure that the ends are relatively straight. Mine are a bit round right now, so I'm just going to straighten that out. Okay, so there I've got the ends cut. Now I'm going to start with some designs. I want you to put a couple of little V marks in, and the measurement isn't really important, but make sure the measurement is the same from both ends. Here I've got a diamond point tool and I'm going to go in about 1 centimeter. I'll do a couple of little marks, and there's about 1 centimeter from the other end, and I've got a couple of little marks there. I'll just shut that off for a second so I can do some sanding. Now you don't ever sand with the tool rest in the way. You've got to remove that, and we're going to do some sanding. The first sandpaper that you use is always coarse sandpaper, and we're going to use 3 different grits of sandpaper. Coarse, we're going to use about 100 grit. We've got 100 grit there. And medium, we're going to use 150 grit. There's 150. And the fine sandpaper, we're going to use 220 grit. So we always work from coarse to fine. Right now, we're looking at our project, and it has scratches, it has rough edges, and those are all put in there because of the lathe tools. So in order to remove the bad scratches from the lathe tools, I'm going to use 100 grit sandpaper. Now 100 grit sandpaper is relatively coarse, and by the time we're done, we're going to see scratches in there. So to get rid of the scratches caused by the 100, we go to 150, and to get rid of the scratches caused by the 150, we move to 220. And by the time we move to 220, we've just about got it so smooth we won't even notice anything. So I'll just move this tool rest out of the way, or the saddle out of the way a little bit, and away we go with sanding. Always sand on the bottom. This is rotating in this direction. You don't want to sand on the top. It's just going to buckle back right at you. So you sand and you let the lathe pull the sandpaper away from you. So when you're sanding, you want to make sure that you've got your hands so that you can get them out of the way. It's going to get hot. There is a significant amount of the heat generated there. So there you've got the first sanding done, and that's with 100 grit, and we'll move to the 150 grit sandpaper. .150 grit sandpaper, it leaves a few little scratches in it, but those scratches are just caused by the 150. Now we're going to move to 220. This will be a lot finer. And you can see there was an awful lot of small particles of wood coming off there at that time. Now, these grooves look nice, but I need a little bit more accent to them. I would like to darken them up. I'd like to make them so they stand out a little bit. So I have a special tool here, and we just call this a burning tool. And it's shaped like a slingshot, and there's a piece of welding wire in the center. Now, if I hold that welding wire up against the groove, as it's rotating, it's going to get hot, and it will eventually cause a little bit of burning in the wood. So that's what I'm going to do right now. And the burning has darkened the wood, and I'll just take my 220 grit sandpaper and sand it down just a little bit more. Okay, so there I've just finished sanding the project with the 220 grit, but you know, I'm not done yet. It isn't as smooth as it could be. Feels great, but it's not quite done. So I'm going to do a process which is called burnishing. Burnishing is when I take a material that is exactly the same material as I was working on, and I rub it up against the project, and I let that material polish the original. So here I go. I've got a handful of the turnings that are laying around here. It's all the same wood. And that's a lot better. So what I did was I squeezed it right up into the wood, and I let it get hot, and as it was pressed up into the rotating material, it just polished it, and that's actually burnishing. Is what it's called. Now I'm happy with the head, and we'll just take that out, and we're done making the head on the mallet.